Yeah, that's right. I have more Gravity Falls reviews to do. The Gravity Falls Lost Legends comic book has finally been released. I've given it a good couple of reads over, and I feel like I have enough material here to get one review out of each of the 4 stories in the comic itself. Each one feels like it has just as much material crammed into it as an episode of the show, if not a little bit more in a couple of cases. And so I am treating these reviews just like any other Gravity Falls reviews. These are 4 more reviews of 4 more episodes of Gravity Falls, at least as far as I'm concerned. From what I can tell, all of them are written by Alex Hirsch himself, which is pretty frickin' great. And while I do think they vary in quality, while there are a couple that I like less than a couple of the others, none of them are bad at all. They are all very good, and the degree to which I like them is very similar to the degree to which I like any 2 episodes of the show, and you guys know how much I like the show. Now, a quick disclaimer. I, for one, was hoping when this comic was first announced that this was going to be a continuation of the series. That these stories would take place after all of the events of the series and give us more to the story. In that way. It's not as if that's the only way to give us more to the story, after all. Just in case you're one of the people who was also hoping that and don't know otherwise at this point, that is not what this is. These stories do take place during the time frame of the series itself, after Ford was returned to our dimension. It's a bit of a bummer, but it doesn't make these stories any less great. I also want to talk really quick about the framing device of this comic. We, as the audience, are actually being told these stories by one of the residents of Gravity Falls. One of the supernatural residents, in fact. Remember that gnome, Shmebulok, who is so dumb that he can only say his name? Shmebulok? Well, it turns out he's not actually that dumb. He was cursed to only be able to speak his name, which doesn't explain why he doesn't write stuff out to people, but doesn't matter. But every 1,000 years, for a limited period of time, that curse breaks, and he is able to speak the human tongue. And coincidentally, that just happens to line up with now, so he wants to tell us these stories while he has the chance. Alex Hirsch, through this framing device, frames Shmebulok as a fan just like us. He essentially frames Shmebulok as the Pines, but for humans. The Pines are interested in and investigate the weird supernatural creatures of Gravity Falls, but Shmebulok investigates the humans, and he particularly likes the Pines. His interest in them has continued all the way up until now, even after their adventures, aka the show itself, has ended. Shmebulok is an insert for fans who remain interested in the show and keep trying to find secrets in the show even to this day, and putting him here, showing us that the fruit of his labors is these new stories that we wouldn't have gotten to see without him, validates fans who are still interested in the show now. It also sort of gives us a little insert into this world, a foothold that we can project ourselves upon, and I think that's really cool. That's a great idea. And during all of these little bookend segments that feature Shmebulok, it really does feel like we're kind of having a conversation with him. It's just very cool, and I thought it was worth making note of, because otherwise I'm not really going to be talking about it in these reviews. Getting on to the first story, though, and I apologize, these are going to be spoilerific if you haven't read the comic, but I will kind of blast through these synopses as fast as I can, so that there will still be plenty of surprises for you if you do go to read them after having watched this. Ford leaves for a short period of time to go hunt down the Mothman, and leaves his 3 journals with Dipper, which Dipper is, of course, excited about. But before he can really investigate them all that much, someone shows up at the house. But before he can really do all that much investigating into them, someone shows up at the Mystery Shack, and it turns out to be Pacifica. It's time for her family's annual Northwest magazine cover shoot, because apparently that's a thing that they do. And she is embarrassed that she has a wrinkle under her left eye, and she wants to use the magic of the journals to try and fix it. Dipper and Mabel, of course, won't let her do that, because it's monumentally stupid. And also because they honestly don't care about looks as much as she does, but it's mostly the first thing. So she asks to use their bathroom instead and sneaks off and finds journal number 1, in which she discovers a page detailing Mr. What's-His-Face and accidentally summons him. He claims that he can give her a perfectly blemish-free face, one which will stay that way forever. What he neglects to reveal, though, is that he does so by removing your face and leaving a smooth layer of skin behind it. It's really freaking creepy. But as he's about to do this, Dipper and Mabel come up the stairs to give Pacifica the self-confidence sweater that Mabel knit for her in the last 3.5 minutes, apparently. Interrupt the procedure, and Mabel's face is accidentally stolen instead. Mr. What's-His-Face runs off and uses a magic key of some kind to go through a door behind which is only a brick wall and disappear. Dipper and Pacifica, who have teamed up to follow him, see him do so, and Dipper uses his president's key to reopen the same passage that Mr. What's-His-Face used, which is very creepy, The passageway is super creepy, but they take it anyway, and they end up in an underground black market for human body parts and other various supernatural things related to the body that Ford has apparently been trying to gain entry to for a very long time. There are no humans allowed here, even though we actually do see one of the residents of Gravity Falls down there trading. In disguise, mind you, but still. And so when Dipper and Pacifica are almost identified as humans, and Dipper is actually left speechless, he doesn't know what to do in this situation, it's actually Pacifica who steps up and saves them. She convinces the person who found them that she's an elf and he's a troll boy, allowing them essentially free reign of this place. But when one of the stalls is promising pills which will give Pacifica the perfect face, she and Dipper get into an argument where he accidentally yells to the entire place that they're human. They get put up for sale because this place is already one big human trafficking analogy. You might as well just take the final step. And Mr. What's-His-Face buys them and takes them back to his lair. He takes Dipper's face as well and then starts tormenting Pacifica, claiming that he really can give her the perfect face, one which will stay perfect forever. He even shows it by turning his own face into a flesh tornado, which eventually forms into a more made-up version of Pacifica's face. Otherwise, it's pretty much identical. The makeup's just better. It was super frickin' gross. But Pacifica at this point, she is armed with everything she needs to resist this now. On their way to Mr. What's-His-Face's lair in his burlap sack, she and Dipper had a heart-to-heart. Pacifica really does believe that her looks are the most valuable thing about her. She doesn't have any confidence in any other part of herself, because for her entire life, her parents have been telling her just that. So when Dipper makes a point of explaining to her that he sees so much more in her, that she isn't just a pretty face, it affects her profoundly. And leads to, I think, one of the most touching moments in the series, in a comic meant to supplement the series. You can feel the emotions in this scene, how much Pacifica is affected by this. So when Mr. What's-His-Face makes his offer, she refuses, using the pills that she bought, which conveniently have the side effect of causing the user's face to explode, hence why she did not use them, to make Mr. What's-His-Face's face explode. Meanwhile, while they were looking for Mabel's face, she managed to identify from the inside out one of the other entrances/exits to this place, and since she is able to communicate with her body, which is acting now as a separate entity, a separate Mabel from the face itself, which is also super cool but also super creepy, she coordinates with her body to bring Ford back to that particular exit, so that when the group exits the black market and Mr. What's-His-Face follows, Ford will be there to zap him with a freeze gun so that he can take him back to the bunker, and now Ford even has access to one of the entrances to the black market. Dipper and Mabel get their faces back, and Pacifica realizes that even though she's really messed up right now, she looks totally gross, that she likes this version of herself better than the previous version, and even goes to her photo shoot and gets photographed this way, immortalizing this aspect of herself. I always felt that the Northwest Mystery Mansion or whatever, that episode needed some kind of profound follow-up, and this serves as that. This obviously takes place after that episode. The narrative reminds us of that pretty much constantly. And it builds upon the characterization that Pacifica received in that episode, as well as the relationships that she built. Dipper feels like he understands her better now, and that's why he's so disappointed when she is so obsessed with her looks, even during this crisis, that she gets them in trouble. I mean, yeah, he's the one who yelled out that they were humans, but he wouldn't have felt any need to do that if she could have just put off caring about her looks for 5 minutes. Now, I will freely admit that in the time since I finished reviewing the series, I have become Dipsifica trash, I guess would be the best way to put it. Let's just be honest here. I just can't get over how much potential I feel that a relationship between the two of them has. So it's possible that this being written as a Dipsifica story did affect me more for that reason. This story was written in part for me specifically, and people who like their relationship like I do. I really do feel like it works so much better than Dipper's other romantic interest, that being Wendy, who is not his romantic interest. His interest in Wendy was effectively the love at first sight trope. And yeah, he did get to know her later and come to realize that he really did like her as a person later. But the majority of the part of their relationship during which he was openly interested in her, his interest bordered more on the fanatical than the romantic, and she was never interested in him. You also never really got the sense that if they were romantically involved, their relationship would be any different. And I honestly believe that, especially in fiction, when we're dealing with characters who are written to grow and change, that a romantic relationship should cause the characters to grow and change. The relationship between Dipper and Pacifica does that. Pacifica has received the bulk of the growth from their interactions, of course. But look at Dipper in that burlap sack scene in this comic. Throughout most of this comic, he's pretty dismissive of Pacifica's problems, but when he sees how actually genuinely emotional she is over all of this, he sits down and lets her talk about her problems with him. He accepts that her problems are valid, which is something that he might not have done earlier in the series, that he might not have done before getting to know her personally. He is also growing as a person because of their relationship. And if you are someone who's questioning whether or not this is actually a Pacifica story, you just have to read the closing bookend to this particular chapter of the comic, because it makes it pretty obvious. The imagery in this comic was also fantastic. I honestly think it's the best drawn of any of the 4 stories here, which is not to say that the others are badly drawn, it's just that I prefer this one over the other ones in terms of the art style. There's just so much detail packed in every single panel of this comic. It feels a little busy in places, but it feels busy in the same way that the background animation in the show was busy. It's busy because there's just so much happening here. There were nods to continuity all throughout this chapter, from the President's Key all the way up to some of the stuff that we see in the black market, which, despite the fact that I really want to show you a full, complete shot of the black market in its entirety, I am not going to do here. You can go back to where I showed it a little bit earlier and pause it if you really want to see it, but I don't want to spoil all the little details that are there for someone who hasn't bought the comic yet. Because there were details out the butt in that scene, returning characters, references to stuff. It was absolutely fantastic. This story also skirted the line between being an action story, a horror story, and a relationship story, just like all of the best episodes of the show. There were elements of all those things here, and some of the creepiest imagery I've seen from this series. This shot here of Mabel's body acting independently of her face is one of the creepiest things that I've ever seen in my life. All in all, this was a true Gravity Falls story. It furthered the characters. It expanded the lore. It built the world. It's everything that I could have hoped for, except that it doesn't take place after the events of the series. But because it does everything so well, and because that was kind of a pipe dream anyway, I don't care. I love this story for exactly what it is. And even though these stories were only stage 2 canon, if anything from the show itself or from any other future canon material does contradict this story, then it's out. But I didn't see anything in here which did directly contradict canon. I didn't see anything in the entire comic, really, that blatantly contradicted canon, except for maybe a couple of Easter eggs here and there. So I am going to count this right up there with some of the best episodes of the show, and I really do think it fits with some of the best episodes of the show. I certainly hope more comics are made, because I want more stories like this one. If only to get more of Pacifica's growth, because the growth of her character has been just fantastic. Do you remember how much I hated her at the beginning of the series? I hated her as much as Dipper did. And now I really like her. Just like Dipper does. Am I Dipper? No. No, that's silly. I wish, though. All that said, though, guys, as per usual, I'd like to know, what did you think of this particular comic book story? If you have read it, let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description, though I would like to ask you to please refrain from commenting about the other stories in this comic until I've reviewed those too, so as not to spoil people unnecessarily. Either way, though, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.